I seem to have ruffled some feathers among the Michael Knowles supporters out there. Good. My most recent video was titled, "If Brett Cooper Loves Her Brother, She Must Disown Michael Knowles." And the point I made in that video is Brett Cooper has a brother who is severely mentally ill and chronically homeless as a result, and that if she cares about her brother at all, she needs to be aware of the fact that when the similarly homeless Jordan Neely was strangled to death by Daniel Penny, Michael Knowles, someone who she described as, quote, "one of the kindest people I know," end quote, was quick to come on camera with a news commentary item where he laughed at, mocked, and derided Jordan Neely and seemed to take genuine, laughing, mocking, humorous pleasure in the murder of this person. And even if this was a clear-cut case of Jordan Neely being in the wrong, which it's not, Michael Knowles still should have the basic human decency not to take such visceral pleasure in the death of another person, especially if he is, as he touts himself, a Christian. The reason I bring that up, I made the point that Brett Cooper needs to be aware that Michael Knowles would most likely, assuming he didn't know that this was Brett Cooper's brother and feel the need to, put up some sort of artifice of human decency, would most likely laugh uproariously and mock her brother if her brother was killed in a similar fashion. She needs to really think about that. And the whole underpinning of the message that I was trying to get across was just that the folks at the Daily Wire, as much as I sometimes appreciate things that they say or sometimes agree with them, have a very, very strong malevolent, vigilante, authoritarian undercurrent. This sort of attitude that the nanosecond someone perceives something to be wrong, they can somehow kill first and ask questions later, if at all. So anyway, of course, inevitably, people started coming to me, accusing me of misrepresenting the whole debacle with Jordan Neely and Daniel Penny. So if you're not aware, Jordan Neely was a severely mentally ill homeless man who was known locally in the New York area, in the city of New York, as a Michael Jackson subway impersonator, and would apparently do various busking routines to earn money for himself with this act. At one point, however, earlier this year, he got on a subway car saying that he was hungry, that he did not care if he went to jail, and that he was not feeling well. I don't have his exact words in front of me. They are certainly available for you to review. But anyway, according to witnesses, there were people who were made uncomfortable by his behavior. But according to other witnesses, it was in fact Daniel Penny who appeared to be severely uncomfortable in the presence of Jordan Neely, and who was appearing agitated and out of control and assaulted him apropos of virtually nothing. So all of this is on its way to trial, etc., etc. But what gets me is that the Michael Knowles fans out there seem to want to keep pointing to Jordan Neely's background of criminal altercations. Somebody said that he had four outstanding warrants for assaults, and that I was deliberately obfuscating the truth by only mentioning one of them. No, that was the one that I had heard about. If there are a total of four, then that's totally fine. I have no problem taking them into account. Now, here's the thing, though. You keep talking about his past criminal behavior as if that somehow influences the situation or the justification of killing him. Let me break this down for you very simply. What is now being decided, his death has been ruled a homicide, meaning he did die as a result of Daniel Penny's actions. There's no question about that. What is now being determined in a court of law is whether or not Daniel Penny acted appropriately when he did that. That is what we are there to determine. Okay. Now, what then has to be established is, what was Daniel Penny's mindset when he went into the actions that ultimately resulted in the death of Jordan Neely? Are we still together? Are we still on the same page? Have I held your hand sufficiently? Or okay. Here's the thing. In order for Jordan Neely's background to be a contributing factor in Daniel Penny's decision to take actions which ended his life, Daniel Penny would have to have prior knowledge of Jordan Neely's previous criminal actions, or at the very least alleged criminal actions. Now, Daniel Penny is not clairvoyant. He is not telepathic. By his own admission, he did not know this person. He has no way of knowing that Jordan Neely had these issues, these allegations in his background when he made his decision to act. Therefore, now, look, just bear with me. Just take one more step. Just one more step, champ. Come on. Take one more step with me. We'll get you some cotton candy and a pinwheel, I promise. Just stay with me here, okay? If Daniel Penny did not know about those prior incidents and had no way of knowing about them, then those actions on the part of Jordan Neely cannot be a credible factor in his decision. Does that make sense? What happened previously was not an open factor in the situation at hand. Was not an open factor in the situation at hand. It's not like somebody said, "Oh no, there's that guy that's got four allegations of four assault allegations against him." Nothing like that. Daniel Penny's only motivating factors were what happened in that train that day. Okay? Now, here's the thing about that. Now, hopefully that made sense. And yes, I know I was condescending, and yes, that probably got on your nerves. And I'm sorry for that, but it's my way of venting my frustration at having to explain again and again what I think it should be the obvious to people that are supposedly normally functioning human beings. And also, hopefully, by straining your goodwill just a little bit, maybe, just maybe, you'll actually stop and think about what I'm trying to say here. But see, the reason you keep factoring that in is not based on a process of logical argumentation. It's based on confirmation bias. And I can prove it. I am willing to bet that the majority of people who are on the side of Daniel Penny are probably also on the side of George Zimmerman. Seems like every single time one of these vigilante wingnuts loses control and kills apparently somehow inappropriately acting person, always heinously overreacting to the situation at hand. Every time one of these things happens, it seems like there's always a reliable cadre of people that just get on their side every single time and never stop to think, hey, maybe, just maybe, this person overreacted and we shouldn't. They're not some kind of hero. They're just some local wingnut that made the situation far worse than it needed to be. And, you know, like I've said before, Trayvon Martin was the altercation with Trayvon Martin happened because George Zimmerman chose to engage with him because he saw Trayvon Martin walking slowly and looking in windows. The assumption being, of course, that he was casing the joint. Well, even if that had been true and he had been casing the joint, the punishment for casing the joint is not cold-blooded murder in the middle of the street. The same thing with Ahmaud Arbery. People say, oh, he was in that house because he was the construction site house because he was looking for a place to stash drugs. Well, even if that's true, the punishment for trespassing to stash drugs is not cold-blooded murder in the middle of the street. And on and on and on it goes. The fact that the defenders of these people have no concept of proportion is one of the telltale signs that we're not dealing with people that are clearly evaluating the situation. But bringing it back to my point about George Zimmerman. Okay, so a lot of people, when Trayvon Martin was killed, the same strange clairvoyance started happening. They started saying, oh, well, Trayvon Martin was killed. Let's see, what was it? It was graffiti, and I think there was an incident, a fight on a school bus, that kind of thing. I'm not negating it, but whatever he did, if he was behaving inappropriately, he was behaving inappropriately, and he should have been punished accordingly. The thing is, they bring all of these things in. Oh, there was all of this, that, and the other. Supposedly, all of these things justify what George Zimmerman did, even though George Zimmerman had no way whatsoever of knowing that any of this was going on, that any of this had occurred. He did not know Trayvon Martin. He had no way of knowing that any of these things had occurred, so he could not have factored that into the way he acted towards Trayvon Martin. Maybe what you're trying to do when you bring those things up is you're trying to say that even if the assailants in question did not know about these prior histories, those documented cases lend some degree of credibility to the accusations or the actions of the vigilantes and that sort of thing. Okay, I can prove that that's bullshit, and I can prove that you're operating off of confirmation bias, and I'll do it right now. George Zimmerman, prior to the killing of Trayvon Martin, prior to the incident, the whole incident that evening, prior to doing that, he had been arrested for felony assault of a police officer and for resisting arrest, and had been forced to undergo court-ordered anger management classes as a result. Since killing Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman has been the subject of multiple incidences involving the police and accusations of anger and violence. He has a long and well-documented history of being a violently angry person. One person who worked with him as a security guard said that George Zimmerman's chronic temper problems contributed to his inability to do that job correctly, and said that for the most part George Zimmerman was a nice guy, but when he went off, he went off. And I'm roughly paraphrasing what he said from an article I read just now, and I'll link that below. Anyway, the point being that all of those things would indicate that all of those things, as well as the dozens and dozens of largely superfluous 911 calls that George Zimmerman was known for making throughout his years as a totally unauthorized neighborhood watchman and a totally unofficial neighborhood watchman, because he was not registered with the police, and neighborhood watchmen in that area are required to not carry firearms because your goal as a watchman is to watch. Anyway, all of those things, you the defender of Daniel Penny, you the defender of George Zimmerman, you are not factoring any of those things into your opinion of George Zimmerman. Everything I just said went right out the window. You probably sat and listened to everything I said, heard none of it and comprehended none of it, because your confirmation bias is so strong that your mind, your amygdala, will actually start working to filter out the information that gets to your back brain, to the computer the computer part of our brain that distinguishes us from the animals. It will actually start filtering out information that doesn't factor into what you want to hear. It will start shutting you down so that you don't take into consideration information you don't want to hear. George Zimmerman was a raving maniac by all accounts, or at least that's an editorial statement, I should say. At the very least, he had violent anger problems and continues to have violent anger problems to this very day. But none of that factors into your opinion of George Zimmerman. You'll factor into the altercation Trayvon Martin's past history of violent altercations, but you will not factor in George Zimmerman's history of violent altercations, because you want Trayvon Martin to be guilty in that situation. Similarly, in the case of Daniel Penny, you won't factor in that he is a former Marine, or if you do, you'll paint him up as some kind of hero because of that, like Michael Knowles did. But quite frankly, a former Marine is someone who is trained to kill people. Let's make no bones about it, that if you are a soldier in any branch of the military, your ultimate function is to kill. And certainly if you are a Marine, and he certainly knew how to do it and certainly knew what he was doing. Now, here's another thing you won't factor into consideration. The New York State has specific laws in place for self-defense. They do not have a stand your ground law. The stand your ground law, and the question of whether or not George Zimmerman effectively employed the stand your ground law, was the central factor in the case about whether or not what he did, whether or not he used justifiable force against Trayvon Martin. New York City has no such stand your ground law. They have they have what's known as the castle laws, or castle domain laws, and that means that you do not have to, or you are authorized to use deadly force if you feel threatened by someone in your home. But as far as being out in public, there is at least some mandate that you retreat or try to escape the confrontation before employing force. Daniel Penny did absolutely none of that. He was apparently not even being directly threatened or having any kind of direct encounter with Jordan Neely whatsoever. He simply decided to put him into a chokehold that he knew had the potential to end his life, and carried it on long enough to end his life. Again, this, and I want to close, I want to close this with one more thing while I have the ear of the Michael Knowles fans. See, the thing is, you talk about being pro-life. You talk about being pro-life. And about, that little baby in the womb, just, oh, you are so compassionate towards the unborn and that baby in the womb. That you are so compassionate. Well, here's the thing. I have a lot of trouble believing that you're actually motivated by compassion when you talk about being pro-life. And the reason I have trouble believing you is because I see how you evaluate situations where you have this automatic. You reserve this automatic right to be judge, jury, and executioner the nanosecond you perceive things to be even slightly out of order. You see a guy walking down the street, apparently looking in people's windows, and you think that justifies murder. You see somebody possibly, maybe stashing drugs in a house that's being built, and you think that justifies cold-blooded murder in the middle of the street. You see somebody yelling on the subway, and you think that justifies cold-blooded murder on the floor of a subway car. The threshold for when you are willing to employ deadly force is so incredibly low that it is impossible to believe that you have any sort of humanitarian regard for human life whatsoever. In fact, and this is one of my big problems with conservatives. And if I'm getting a bunch of liberal left-wing subscribers because of these videos, rest assured I have plenty to say about you guys. You guys have lumps to take too, but the conservatives happen to be on the chopping block today. Look, you seem to only care about humanitarian issues when it involves you being able to justify ratcheting up the amount of suffering in the world. Suddenly you care about life when it gives you an opportunity to force a woman to do something against her will, to force a woman to carry out 9 months of indentured servitude against her will. And the fact that you're going to scoff at what I just said doesn't change the fact that that's what you're doing. You only care about humanitarian issues when it allows you to ratchet up the amount of suffering in the world. That is it. Because at the end of the day, the conservative party, the conservative branch of the government is the branch, ultimately the branch of arrogant shit-kicking assholes. And any pretense that you have towards humanitarian agendas is fallacious at best. Now, it's hard. We're not talking about, for example, a more libertarian position, the kind I take, where I hold that private enterprise and private organizations are better at carrying out humanitarian interests than the government themselves. I say things like that, and people on the left start losing their shit because they can't even comprehend the possibility of that being the case. But then we're not talking about that. We're talking about conservatives only get behind humanitarian agendas when it allows them to ratchet up the amount of suffering in the world. And the whole pro-life thing is just proof of that. You're not pro-life. You are pro-murder, in cold-blooded murder in the middle of the street. And the fact that you pop a chode every time you hear about a woman being forced to carry a baby to term against her will does not invalidate the fact that everything else you do is motivated by anger and vigilante anger and bloodthirst and this desire to just shake your dick in the face of everybody who might dare to say, hey, let's exercise a little restraint.